I'm going to call to order this Lacey City Council meeting on November 14th, 2019. If you're able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay.
So we have a published agenda for this evening. Is there any additions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda?
Move to
items?
approve the agenda and consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We have an agenda. First up on our agenda is public comment on items not on the agenda. I didn't have anyone sign up. So seeing none, then we'll go straight into our first public hearing. I'm going to open up our final 2020 public hearing on the budget, right?
2020.
And turn it over to Troy.
Thank you, Mayor Ryder. Good evening, Council. We are here to conduct our final hearing on the proposed 2020 budget. I'll keep my comments brief this week, probably no less boring, but certainly quicker. So before you have a budget that is unchanged from last week, so your total proposed budget for this entire city is $156,410,821. This is a decrease of about $2 million. The primary reason for the decrease is really lower capital projects and capital expenditures, which impact on the revenue side as well in terms of use of beginning cash or reserves to fund those and transfers between funds to fund those projects. I will note that the capital project reductions are offset by increasing labor costs and public safety workforce considerations. And looking at your general fund budget, this is the budget that I think citizens most identify with in terms of services. This proposed budget for next year is $51,555,869. This is about a $3.8 million decrease, or about 6.8% compared to this year's amended budget. The same reasons we're seeing the decrease because of lower capital and transfers and use of beginning cash. So again, this proposed budget at this point does not have any changes from what was presented last year. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to take public testimony and for city staff to receive any final direction from you, the council, as to any changes you would like to see to the budget. Your budget is scheduled for adoption on Thursday, December 5th. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or take any directions you might have.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to address this council on the proposed 2020 budget? I'll turn to the council. The one question that was brought up this past week was that we did have a request from the Washington Center, which is currently not in this budget. I've talked with our city manager a little bit about that, and it seems like we may need to go back to a work session to talk about possible funding sources, and it's pretty late in the process right now to change the budget for that. I would really like to help the Washington Center, but I think we may need to hear their strategy again and maybe get some feedback in from the other cities and how what they're going to be doing as well. We're going to be meeting with the three cities tomorrow, the deputy mayor, myself, and we can bring this subject up to them. We had it on the agenda the last time we met, but we didn't get to it, and so I'm really sort of interested into seeing what the overall strategy is and from public and private investment to the Washington Center through this major remodel. And so I'm willing to, talk this through some more. Is there any advice or anything, direction from this council on that, Deputy Mayor?
I agree. I would actually like to sit down and have a discussion where we can think through it and get some input about how we can do this or not, or how much is reasonable and stuff. But I don't think at this time we can just add it in without knowing what we're doing, really.
I concur.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree that this needs a discussion before we start talking about heading into our budget.
Yeah.
And everybody has to have skin in the game, not just Lacey.
Yeah, so, like I said, I really would like to help the Washington Center, but I think we need to have a strategy on how we do that. There's been some discussion, we talked about, there's some LTAC reserves, we could maybe look at that, but that goes into another process that we'd have to bring LTAC back together to do that. Hopefully we can have a work session, not too terribly into the future, and try to come up with a solution that satisfies everyone. So, given that, is there any other direction?
I'd just like to comment for the good of the order and for the public that I appreciate our complete process of bringing this to the council for 3 times plus work sessions for the public comment time available and the input from the public and the council. I just don't want anybody out there thinking that we're just taking care of this as a line item tonight. So thank you for that.
Deputy Mayor?
Again, for the audience's knowledge, we do have a line item in our reserve for helping towards the climate mitigation plan of $100,000. So we don't need it in this budget. We could pull it out if we needed it because it's in a reserve line.
Good. And I'm perfectly open to amending the budget a little further down the road once we've had the Washington Center discussion, if that seems like the best source of funding that.
Great. So, Mr. City Manager?
So maybe just 2 items, and the finance director can help me. I think there was at least a request for the Build a Bus project. We just need final direction on that. I believe the request was worth $5,000. Understand that needs further discussion, but I just want to make sure we address that issue. At the budget presentation I gave, there's a question about the neighborhood grant program and about what would that be, what would be a reasonable increase for that. I did talk to Public Affairs who actually manages that program. They said $10,000. So $50,000 currently is budgeted. Another $10,000 would be appropriate given what was asked in 2019. So very quickly, they couldn't fund all the requests for the neighborhood grant program that we did in 2019, so they ended up reducing those requests to 90% to make sure everyone got their request. So the question last time was, if you were to increase it, what would that be? And so $10,000 would be that answer.
Okay.
And also, I believe Citizen came forward and just wanted to make sure, had a comment about the grant guidelines. I just want to make sure council has seen these again as part of this discussion. So pass this out.
Well, I think that would be an appropriate number. If 60,000 is what would make it work, then I think that would make a lot of sense. So does the council have, is in concurrence with that, to raise that line item to $60,000?
Could you repeat the request?
So right now, we have a neighborhood grant program with a line item of $50,000. It wasn't, we had several applications come in last year and they couldn't quite fill them all. This is an extremely, I think, beneficial program for the city of Lacey. And I had made mention that, do we need to take a look at that? And I asked Scott, what would that number be? And he just came back and said, we were about $10,000 short last year, so a $60,000 line item would cover those requests, and I would be in support of that.
And where do the funds come through for this grant? What's the source of the funds?
So this is general fund dollars, and this is to help the HOAs that we have in the city of Lacey.
Not just the HOAs, though, right?
Well, but neighborhoods, but they're mostly HOAs. So some of the projects have been, entrance cleanup, beautification projects, tree trimming, rebarking open space, sort of rec areas, replacing mailboxes, LED lighting in neighborhoods. So those have been some of the more common funding proposals that we've funded. There's also either a dollar for dollar or at least in-kind labor for dollar. So that's a matching requirement part of the program.
I think that match program is fantastic, and I like the engagement process where the communities within our community have to initiate and step up and do that. I think that's fantastic.
I love the program, don't get me wrong, but this is a 20% increase, and it seems like a big,
Is that
right?
$10,000?
If 50,000 and you're raising it 10. But, you know, that's the only thing that caused hesitation to me. I'd love to have all our budgets and increases be 20%. It's just a big number.
Just, you know, the thing is from all the feedback I've received from our residents, I've had more positive feedback on this neighborhood grant program than almost anything else. I mean, and a lot of times, these are projects that aren't currently be able to covered under their typical, you know, through their HOA dues or anything else. And so, you know, this really is taking our neighborhoods in Lacey and with hard work from the neighborhood, right? Because they have to match it. They're really able to do some projects they just couldn't get done. And when you're, you know, driving along through a neighborhood and you see a broken fence that's been, you know, not unable to be fixed for a long time, and they put in the labor and we put in, you know, a little bit, it's been a win-win program for a long time. And I would like to see it met.
Yeah, I would support the increase to 60 on this one. You know, this is a program, the key thing about it that I like is the fact that it is a match program. The association or the neighborhood is actually either coming up with money or, in most cases, more likely labor. So they're actually bringing the community together to do good work, and we're helping to fund it, but they're matching it. I think it's a great program. It's worked well.
Yeah, absolutely. Deputy Mayor?
Well, what I like is they're actually doing it. So it's not falling on staff to do that. So, yeah, it's a positive thing.
Councilmember?
Question, are we held harmless if someone's working on a project and gets hurt? How does that work?
Yeah.
Look into the law.
Counselor?
For our defense attorney.
There's a lot of factors involved there.
Okay.
I would suspect so, yes. I would suspect that they'd be doing the work. The city's going to be providing some funding. The city's not going to have liability for, hard to say, but most likely not going to have liability for some sort of accident that would occur.
I don't like to chase hypotheticals, but thank you.
Anyone? Yes? Okay, well, that is the one budget amendment that this council would like to put forward.
For sure. Maybe a little bit of clarification from the council in terms of where the $10,000 is going to come from. First, we would look towards excess revenues, which there aren't any in this proposed budget at this point. We're a balanced budget. We would next look to reserves, and your exercise on October 3rd has accounted for all those reserves. So now we have to look at decreasing another line item, and I do have a suggestion for the council. We do have $200,000 in our homelessness services for the Capitol or Carpenter Road mitigation site that aren't going to be used next year. I would propose that you take $10,000 from that source, put it into this grant program. That would leave you $190,000 in terms of an emerging issue line item for next year's budget.
Okay.
Councilmember?
If I could on that. I can't go into a whole lot of detail now, but I think there may be another project that replaces that one. So is there another source that money could come out of?
That's the easy one. I think that, you know, for the purposes of a different project, we could look at reserves that are going to be added to for the 2019 year. I just don't have that number. I feel very confident that we are going to have additional reserves for this year. And we could certainly make sure that's a priority in terms of the use of those reserves.
So what we could do is for budget purposes, we could switch that now, and then if a project comes up, we can look at reserves that come from 2019 to backfill that. Does that seem right?
Kind of looking at the city manager here on that.
I think that would be correct, because at that point, we'd have more information. We can always do a budget amendment for the 2020 year, and we know the funds are available, and we'd have more discussion about it.
Okay.
So that makes sense.
I just, would hate to see us get to the table and then Lacey's $10,000 short.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure when this budget closes out for 2019, we will have extra reserves.
Yeah.
Like we do every year.
More zeros than the 10.
With more zeros than the 10,000, for sure. Yeah. Okay, I think that's some final budget analysis there.
Hearing?
I think that we'll need to come back and go through a process.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with making a budget amendment on something we've not discussed even yet, so.
Okay. Well, and with no further comments from the public, I'm going to close the final 2020 budget hearing. And next up is, under resolutions, is our ad valorem tax resolution. Back to Troy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your first action item of the evening is a resolution authorizing the 2020 property tax increase. I think we all know that the statutory limit for property tax increases are the lesser of 1% or inflation. This year's inflation factor is 1.396, so more than 1%, which means the 1% is the limit. State statute also requires that the city council take a separate action authorizing the increase, which is why we have this separate resolution before you today. And the requirement includes language that we must adopt a resolution or ordinance that includes the dollar increase and percentage as well, which the resolution before you does that. So the 1% limit, revenue limit for next year is $67,971, equal to 1%. So the action requested of you tonight is to adopt the resolution authorizing said increase.
Can I get a motion? Well, I would move to adopt the resolution relating to the 2020 ad valorem tax increase.
Second.
It's moved and second. Discussion. Deputy Mayor?
I just have one quick question. It's not really about what we're doing tonight, but the staff report says that the resolution may cover a period of up to 2 years, and we do this every year. Why haven't we considered doing it for a 2-year time?
I believe that's related to the biennial budget process.
Oh,
We're-
okay,
we're in
so
annual
and we
process.
don't do that. Okay, thank you.
That's good. Councilmember?
So I'm going to reluctantly support this, although I don't like the idea of increasing the property tax to 1% because I don't believe we actually need it. But because of the compounding effect of not doing it, and because of what I've seen in other jurisdictions when they've not done it and the problems it's led to, I will reluctantly support this.
Councilmember?
So question and then comment. Did we not discuss this earlier in the year?
Good.
Why are we discussing it again, or what's the story about that? Jog my memory.
We have to do this by resolution to authorize it. And then
So it was
after this,
discussed informally before?
yeah, remember during our budget workshop, we had a long conversation of what that actual 1% compounding would be in 10
Oh,
years
okay.
and so on and so forth. And,
Okay.
you know, for the last 2 years, this has been a tough discussion, right? Because the
Yeah.
last 2 years, we've had some pretty record surpluses, and it's always difficult. But it's just so hard when you look at those those 10 years from now, what we would have missed.
Yeah.
And so it's, and obviously when our costs are going up by at least inflation, if not more, and this is just 1%, it's so difficult to not go forward on a 1%.
Okay, so now my comment. I'm not going to support this for a few reasons. Certainly, philosophically, I really have a hard time with property tax. It's a tax on an investment that's not realized. There's already tax when you sell a house, and the buyer ends up paying for it when they buy it, and then they end up paying for it when they sell it. And I've just seen too many folks that are living in their investment, which is called the American dream, and they're especially if they're happen to invest in some view or some higher quality versus the others, then they get taxed more, and they get literally taxed out of their home as their income and fixed income goes down. And so I think that would be the definition of a regressive tax. The second reason is that on the argument that this is a compounding and what we'll miss if we don't get it, that's kind of a staff job to get that for the future. But as a council person representing the taxpayer, I would have to be on their side of it and say, look at all the money that they paid. Again, in a home that they've invested in. And we have a housing crisis and a homeless crisis. And when large home or landowners that own apartments and whatnot get taxed like this, it goes straight to the renter. And those rents go up more and more. Less people can afford to even live in their what's now, sometimes $1,500 or $2,000 a month to rent a decent apartment. And so there's a couple of reasons on that. The third reason is that it's $67,900. We have, fortunately, a $2 million plus decrease in our budget, and I hope that's a good thing, not like maybe some other higher government applications where you don't spend it, you lose it kind of thing. I think this is a good thing that we have a conservative budget. And the finance director also said, which is a good thing, that he's confident about additional reserves towards the end of the year. So things are good, and I want to give the people that have their life savings invested in their real estate a break, and I think we can. So I'm not going to vote for this.
We did, I appreciate that thought process. Didn't we look at what the 1% to the average homeowner would be in the city of Lacey?
We did. It's dollars. If you give me a second here, I'll try to catch up with your question.
And if you have that, could we have a compound number of how much it's been since this has been enacted decades ago?
Decades?
Well, the 1%, remember, this used to be a lot more than 1%.
Yeah.
But
You can add that up.
is there any other comment?
Well, I was going to ask a similar question. I think we need a little perspective here about what the city's property tax really looks like on your bill as compared to if you live in the county or, elsewhere.
Right.
I think what's missing from the discussion is why this tool is given to cities and municipalities. Why do we even have this as an option? It's to make up for revenue loss, correct?
Well, I mean, we can get in a long philosophical debate. Is property tax the best way to fund local government? And from someone who has a lot of property and pays a lot of property tax, I totally understand how regressive it does feel sometimes. But this is the tool that we have, and to fund local government. If there was another tool, that's something we could discuss. But right now, this is the tool that we have.
Right? Because there was
Well,
alcohol.
there used to be a lot of other
revenues
little
and-
different ways that we could fund local government. But the percentage that Lacey pays for property tax is actually relatively small to other taxing authorities. Troy?
Sure, I'll try to catch up with all the questions that have been asked. To the mayor's question as to what the dollar impact is to the average homeowner, so using the $300,000 as an average home and accounting for the 10% appreciation in valuation this year, it's at $4.80 or about 40 cents a month. In terms of the cumulative effect of that, I don't have any spreadsheets or any calculations on that, but it's been a very similar percentage for the last 6 or 7 years in terms of that $3 to $4 or $3 to $5 per year. In terms of percentage, I don't know what the other taxing jurisdictions are proposing for next year, so I'll use 2019 numbers. The typical Lacey property had a total tax per thousand of $10.90. Of that, the city's was $1.24, so somewhere in the 12-14% range of the entire property tax bill.
Okay. Councilmember?
Thank you. I'd just like to thank Councilmember Hearn for his comments because we are in a housing crisis and those are legitimate concerns. However, I also do recognize that this is the way we are funding our government right now. And although over time it might become a burden for some people, as it is, it seems to be less so per year. And so for that reason, I will support this.
So, is there any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded to adopt this resolution relating to the 2020 ad valorem tax increase. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
The motion carries. Next up is ordinances, and first up on the ordinance is this ad valorem tax ordinance. Troy.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. The ordinance before you is to establish the 2020 property tax for next year. There are three factors that are impacting the levy for next year. It is the refund levy, the 1% limit, which we just discussed, as well as new construction. For your information, the refund levy is something that's calculated by the county treasurer. These are adjustments that are made to the previous year's levy. Some of the examples are assessment appeals or errors or even the granting of exceptions from new legislation. So when those are granted, it actually doesn't change the city's legal limit in terms of property tax, so the city is allowed to levy that again in the following years. So that amount for 2020 is $13,433. Again, your 1% limit is $67,971. There is good news in terms of new construction, and I'll remind the council that new construction is exempt from the 1% limit. So as new properties come onto the property tax assessment rolls, we are allowed to accept those as new taxes. We again had a very strong year in terms of new construction here in Lacey. We're adding about $250.9 million worth of new construction. This is very strong, and this results in an increase of $267,189. In terms of valuation for the city of Lacey, we're seeing a significant increase, not only from new construction, but as well as appreciation to the existing properties. Our total assessed valuation increase is about $892 million. And when you take the $250 million in new construction, the existing properties appreciated $641 million. This is about 10%. So look at, the housing market is continuing to show strength, and in terms of development, Lacey is seeing strong activities. So the total proposed levy for next year is $7,145,693. This is an increase of $348,593, or 5.13%. Again, this is being increased by the refund levy, the 1% limit, and the acceptance of new construction. Your proposed ordinance does include, as well as the voter-approved debt levy. The 2020 levy is $1,136,300. This is equal to the voter-approved debt service for next year. This equates to about almost a 16 cent per thousand levy on city properties. So the action requested of you tonight is to adopt the ordinance which will set the 2020 property tax levies.
I move to adopt ordinance number 1053.
Second.
And moved and second. And it's actually, I need to change that. The staff report for the ordinance for this says 1053. It should be ordinance 1553.
I'd make a motion to amend it to, what's the number?
1553.
1553.
Second.
Is that the correct way to do that? Yes. He said the 1053,
It's supposed to be 1553.
Technically, it should be a motion now that would have amended the motion, so now a motion to adopt ordinance 1553.
okay. So do we need two votes on that, or, because he,
Yes.
So there was a motion made, it was seconded, and then there was a motion to amend that.
and it was
and that
seconded?
so now
Okay. So but I need to vote,
So what do we vote on?
I need to vote on the amended amount,
Amended.
and then to vote on the
what's been amended,
it's been amended,
that's right, now there'll be
So it's just be one vote.
discussion.
and then all those in favor.
Okay. Everyone got that?
Yeah, well, it's a technicality, but we're
Technicality, but I
still
want
have
to
a
make sure we
motion
get
to-
it right. So
Okay.
the motion on the floor is to adopt ordinance 1553, the ad valorem tax ordinance. Discussion. Councilmember.
Yes, I'll be voting no on this, just like the resolution. My reasons are, and I'll add one, it's a regressive tax on the American dream. taxing homeowners before they realize their gains. Renters will have to pay more. The state law actually gives us this tool when needed. It's strongly worded as when needed, but not for granted. So that's another reason. We are expecting we have before us to consider a budget that's $2 million plus under last year. This would collect the 67,900. We're also confident about additional reserves by the end of this year, and we're in a housing crisis.
Is there any other discussion?
I would just add that the state gave us this tool to make up for revenues that they took away from us. So, and this is, the revenues lost far exceed any revenues gained by this.
Any other discussion? It's been moved and seconded to adopt this ad valorem tax ordinance 1553. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
The motion carries. Next up is the 2020 water rate ordinance 1554. Back to Troy.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. The proposal before you is to establish 2020 water rates. We have a bit of a unique situation with all our utilities. All three utility rate schedules expire at the end of this year. All three utilities do not have current comprehensive plans. So we are proposing inflationary increases for each of the utilities. We used the same basic policies and assumptions for each of the proposals. So I'll spend a little more time on the water explanation, and the same principles, like I said, carry forward to the other rate proposals. So specifically for water, the City Council last reviewed or adopted rate increases in 2017, and those were also inflationary rate increases for 2018 and 19. Just to cover some of the policies that we follow in terms of setting rates, we establish minimum operating reserves, so cash flow reserves. We establish reserves for capital replacement. We make sure that we cover our debt ratios. That's very important for our bond covenants looking forward. We project growth rate increases throughout the period. We look at our capital improvement plans, and we make sure that we're only building and proposing needed capital projects. And in terms of some of the assumptions, we use historical increases for operational and maintenance expenses. We do have significant capital programs for the next couple of years in terms of water. We are expecting slower development to occur within Lacey. This also maintains the same structure in terms of the council's action to address Lane versus the City of Seattle. This was a fire flow court case. I do recognize that the state legislature fixed that, but we are not reversing that at this point, but I do expect that with the next water comp plan. So the ordinance before you does include a 3% inflationary increase for 2020. And again, this is to address rising costs within operations and maintenance of the utility. I do want to express a couple reasons that we are proposing to continue this inflationary increase. And one, I think it's important that we have steady and consistent rate increases. One, it helps us in the future in terms of addressing capital needs, and it will hopefully alleviate the need for future debt. And again, in keeping a consistent rate, I think it's easier financial planning for not only the utility, but for the customers as well. It really keeps the rates even, so you don't have those catch-up rates in the years that you have high capital program, and as well as it buys down future rates. So those are a couple of reasons that we believe we should maintain a inflationary rate increase. In terms of the 3% to the average residential customer, this is a $1 per month increase. And I do expect that the water comp plan will be completed next year, and we will be bringing a multi-year rate schedule before the council next year. So the action before you tonight is to adopt the ordinance setting the 2020 water rates.
Can I get a motion?
I move that we approve ordinance number 1554 to adopt the water rate ordinance setting the 2020 water rates.
Second.
It's been moved in second. Discussion. Deputy Mayor.
So this, when you talk about the rates, on the Group 1 has 4 tiers, and maybe you've explained this previously and I've just forgotten, but on Group 2, there's only 2 tiers. Can you explain why that is?
So the Group 2 is our commercial and industrial
Right.
Rates, and really the reason for that has to do with water conservation. So when you look at the difference between residential and commercial accounts, irrigation is a much bigger factor in terms of the residential customers. On the commercial side, it's primarily the use within their business versus irrigation. So that's why there's more tiers within the residential structure, just to help promote water conservation.
And having a more tiered wouldn't increase conservation with commercials?
Well, maybe I can add to that. So the 4 tiers, really, there's more discretionary use on the residential side. So I think we've had many discussions with council. During the wintertime, we use about 6 million gallons per day. During the summertime, that sometimes almost goes 2.5, triple. But when you're a business, you have a constant need or demand for a consistent volume, and so they have less discretionary use of that water that they need.
Okay. So the only other thing I would say is, having been on lot and stuff, when we decreased it 1 year, it really made the catch-up a lot higher the next time we had to catch up on big projects. So a gradual increase is a lot easier when you're dealing with huge projects. So I'm in favor of this.
Is there any other discussion? Councilmember?
So I have 2 questions. One, can you confirm, Troy, that all the revenues from this, from the rates, including this proposed rate schedule, go directly towards the cost of distributing water?
I can. It's required, and that's why we have these separate funds to account for these revenues separately.
Is there any delta that these rates do not reach to do that? In other words, do we need other funds to help with it, with that full budget?
There are other funds that go into the water fund. There's actually 3 separate funds that make up the water function. I'll speak to them as a whole. We do have general facility charges that we collect on new development that helps pay for capital. We also have investment interests. We sell water meters to new development as well, but this is the most significant source of revenue for this fund.
I always tend to support revenue ordinances that speak directly to the need versus more general funding. So I'll be supporting this.
Any other discussion? It has been a good point. The rate here in this case is going up 3%, but the general facility charge, as outlined in this, is going to 6%. And can you give a reason why it's going to continue at 6%? I guess because we've been done that.
Sure. So the last comp plan, we actually saw through the calculation of that fee, which I'm not going to try to explain it. It kind of gets beyond my expertise, which is why we use consultants, but it found that we were way behind in terms of what that general facility charge should be. And rather than having, and I don't remember the percentage, but it's quite significant. So we capped that at 6%. And I don't believe it would take years to catch up with where we need to be. So it's really unchanged in terms of the ordinance or the Lacey Municipal Code, but we are continuing that 6% because of that fact that we are behind in what we need to collect in order to address future growth.
I'm glad you mentioned the consultancy that we hire. I think that it's a excellent practice to bring in, even at an expense, a third party without a horse in the race to say, these are what your rates are going to need to be, and I think that's just good practice. So thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, It's been moved and seconded to adopt the water rate ordinance setting the 2020 water rates. It's Ordinance 1554. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. Now we're on to Ordinance 1555, the sewer rate ordinance.
Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Before you is an ordinance that will establish the 2020 wastewater or sewer rates. Again, this is an inflationary rate increase that we're proposing. I will note that in terms of the timing of the comprehensive plan for wastewater, we're actually about 3 years away from that being required to be updated. The legislature, as a bit of relief to local governments and utilities, extended the period in which you have to renew that plan to 8 years from 6 years, which actually puts us at 2023. And I say all that to state that we will probably have to look at a more long-term impact in terms of the rates to even get us to that 2023. So next year we'll probably, I'm not sure if we'll look at consultant or do something internally, but I just want to forewarn the council that we will be looking at that a little closer next year. As I stated in the water rate ordinance, the methodology very similar for wastewater in terms of minimum requirements for cash flow and reserves for capital replacement. So very similar to water, the sewer proposed rate increase is 3%. Again, an inflationary increase. This is equal to 64 cents per month for the average home here in Lacey. So the action requested of you tonight is to adopt this ordinance that will establish the 2020 sewer rates.
Can I get a motion?
I move that we adopt sewer rate ordinance number 1555, setting the 2020 sewer rates.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Councilor?
A couple simple questions. Do all the rates in this ordinance go directly to the sewer facility?
Yes, they do, just like water.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? One thing that was brought up last week was the discussion about the caps septic to sewer, and as you know, none of that information's in here because what we decided is that we're just going to carry over our reserves to cover that for next year. We're going to have that discussion on how we fund that, and there was some conversation that we had about looking at a levy rate, and so some of the discussion that we'll have in the future is that levy rate can be based off of consumption, or is it going to be based off of actual clients or actual customers, overall number. And so I look forward to having that conversation, and I think it will make a lot of sense to go to a levy rate and based on one of those two things. Both will have an impact in different ways, so we can discuss that and what that would look like for overall levy rate, but I'm looking forward to that discussion. Deputy Mayor?
So I'll be talking a little bit about that when I report out on lot.
Great. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved in second to adopt the sewer rate ordinance, setting the 2020 sewer rates. It's Ordinance 1555. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. Now we're on to the 2020 stormwater rate ordinance 1556.
All right, thank you again. This is the final action item you'll hear from me tonight. Again, we're in a similar situation where we're between comp plans and rate schedules. So again, we're proposing an inflationary rate for stormwater. Again, we're using the same policies and assumptions for this proposal. So a little bit different here compared to the other utilities is we have gotten a look at the preliminary comp plan and the financial chapter in terms of the long-term recommendation. And within that financial chapter of the draft, we're seeing a rate increase range of between 3% and 6%. So rather than using the 3%, we're proposing that we take the average of that range, and we're proposing a 4.5% inflationary rate increase for sewer, again, as opposed to the 3%. I will note that also within stormwater, we're seeing a shift from capital improvement driving the rate to regulations. So we're under a new permit which has additional regulation built within it. So we're, again, seeing that shift from having to address those regulation needs away from capital. So again, the proposal before you is to adopt the ordinance that will set the 2020 stormwater rates.
Can I get a motion?
Okay. I move that we approve ordinance number 1556 for stormwater rates.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I would just mention, especially when it comes to stormwater, these rates are very responsible, I guess you'd say. I mean, this could easily be 6% plus. And it really goes for the last two actions we've taken. These rates and inflation are close to it, are very reasonable, so.
All right, Councilmember?
Question, so can you confirm that the rates from this ordinance go directly towards the stormwater processing?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the stormwater rate ordinance setting the 2020 stormwater rates. It's ordinance 1556. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. And our final ordinance is the amendment to LMC Section 8.10.050, the enforcement of camping, ordinance 1557. Chief.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Before you is a proposed amendment to Section 810.050, which is the enforcement section of the camping ordinance. The proposed amendment would give law enforcement the authority to enforce the camping ordinance between the hours of 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 p.m. in the evening. The proposed amendment comes before you in response to the community's request to provide city staff with additional tools to preserve and protect quality of life in the city of Lacey, as well as council's directions for staff to recommend a tool to humanely and proactively address the preservation of quality of life and ensure equal access to open space for everyone in our community. Staff believes this proposed amendment would directly address quality of life related issues associated with camping in public space by giving law enforcement the authority to enforce the ordinance regardless of socioeconomic status during traditional non-sleeping hours. In addition, it would give law enforcement the tool to help motivate service-resistant individuals to utilize available resources to find an alternative to camping. And this will be done in conjunction with our service navigator who started this week in his onboarding process. The service navigator, Mr. Terrence Mitchell, will be working directly with your police department to assist those in need on a daily basis. Be happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Can I get a motion? Can I get a motion first? or do you
I'd
want-
actually like to make an amendment. I don't know, should I do that before the
please do.
motion? How,
Yep,
is that
please.
the best way to do that?
Yep.
So I'd like to suggest that in the, where we have based on conduct, which occurs between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., I'd like to add to that, and in non-residential zones. This would, and I've discussed this with the chief a bit, this would give police more power actually to make sure that the camping, whether it be day or night, is not happening in residential neighborhoods.
Is there a second? I will second it for discussion. So it's been moved and seconded to make this amendment. Now there's discussion. Councilmember?
Could you unpack that a little bit more, that amendment for me?
I'd actually ask the chief to jump in and help with that, possibly.
Councilmember, I think that it makes it much clearer for law enforcement, giving the ability to possibly enforce the camping ordinance. In addition to that, it'd make it very clear to the community what the law entails regarding this issue.
So you recommend the amendment for clarity?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor?
Could you just, because I'm a little confused, so give me an example. So somebody parks in my neighborhood,
This is not parking.
or not parking, camping, sorry, wrong.
So
Oops, we don't want to do that. Camping in my, say, in front of my house,
So,
That would
What
not
the-
allow it.
that would not be allowed no matter what.
yeah, the
On
point
the
of my
public property.
amendment would be that, for instance, on a sidewalk in your
Emphasize.
neighborhood, it would prevent camping on that sidewalk in front of your home.
What if it's a friend of yours, or?
Well, the sidewalk is public property, so your friend wouldn't be allowed to camp on
Do that
public property
anyway.
either. They
Okay,
could
okay.
camp in your yard if you allowed them, but not on the public
It's also
property.
a sidewalk.
Yeah, this is public, strictly
Okay.
public property, not private property.
Okay,
Actually, requested from a member of our community who pointed this out, and I've had conversations with our city manager about this as well, and our city manager is also in favor of this amendment.
okay.
And that citizen is here if you
Citizen is here.
if anyone wanted to hear from him.
I was just going to say, this is all based on feedback from a community member and
Exactly.
public feedback, so.
Yeah,
I think this really makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we shouldn't be having, obviously, people camping on public property in residential neighborhoods. And so I'd be in favor of this amendment. Councilmember?
Just like to ask the attorney just a quick question, and to make sure that this does not complicate things any with the Boise decision.
It doesn't further complicate things. The Boise decision, the ruling itself contemplates regulation of camping in cities, and it indicates that it's not, that ruling does not prohibit regulation. It doesn't go so far as to offer advice on what those regulations should be. This seems completely reasonable. I think enforcement of this would not run afoul of that decision. I'd add a comment, and I guess I'd ask Councilmember Greenstein, I didn't get exactly what your amendment was. I do have language I'd suggest that.
Yeah, please.
Okay, okay. You know, it's often difficult when we have legislation prepared for your review. You're actually looking at it, you're reading it. I would suggest that, you know, keep the amendment as written, and then at the end of the section, at the end of section 8.10.050, after, you know, subsection 2 there, have a statement that, quote, "The provisions contained in this section are not applicable to conduct which occurs in the areas of the city zoned residential. At no time shall camping be allowed in residential areas."
And that is perfect. That's the point I was making, but that was much clearer.
Make a motion.
So the motion.
I had more time to think about it,
So
probably.
the motion is to reflect this new language,
Absolutely.
and and I seconded it, so that's a
Yes.
amended emotion.
This is recorded, so we have no
Yeah.
problem.
So we're now,
Recorded, so we have no
we're into that
problem.
discussion. Is everyone good with that discussion?
Okay.
Councilmember Zun?
I just want to be sure that the public understands that we're not saying that you can't camp in a residential area on your private property.
Yeah, this is
It's-
public property.
Because I didn't hear public property and residential in that last blurb that you spoke about.
It's a good point, council member. Again, we're only looking at one section of an ordinance that the council previously adopted. The ordinance that council previously adopted is only applicable to public property. It's city-owned property.
So this is within.
So private property is not even contemplated here.
okay.
So I think we can all agree this is a regional issue, and would this ordinance bring us closer in line with our neighboring jurisdictions or further?
Do our neighboring jurisdictions contemplate residential areas compared to other areas?
Or just the camping?
I don't think there's any that have actually adopted ordinances or legislation this specific. I don't know that it's out of line with enforcement practices. For example, in Olympia, they have an ordinance on the books that prohibits camping on public property. You know, I think they don't enforce it at certain times of the day, but I'm not, you know, again, obviously I don't represent Olympia. But I don't think it's, I certainly don't think it's a far reach from any of the other jurisdictions or.
But from where we're at right now before this, this would probably bring us more in line to what their ordinance is.
We don't,
Close.
I'd,
we don't know.
Speculating.
that'd be speculative.
Is there any other discussion? Councilmember?
I'd like to highlight the comments for the chief that recommends this ordinance not only for law and order, but for compassion of all citizens, including the homeless. I appreciate that.
Well, I think this council has proven time and time again that, we try to take the advice of the experts that we surround ourselves with. And Chief, you've done just an amazing job since you've come on board. Your handle on this issue has been very enlightening, and we really appreciate it. And I'm happy that we can help support you in this very important issue.
Thank you, Mayor.
This is a motion to amend this, and then we'll have to go back and do it. So it's been moved and second to amend the ordinance to add the language that the city attorney just told us. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Now we have a motion to,
May I
Yep.
first ask a question and see whether or not we want another amendment? And I'm willing to be voted down or something. When you say 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., is 10 p.m., it seems rather late. Not that, I go to bed at 11:30, it's not late for me, but when people, particularly with the homeless, to kind of try to go to sleep type of thing, is 10 p.m. late, or would it be better at 9, say, or whatever? I'm just,
is there some thought process along how you came up with these
yeah,
hours?
that's my question.
I think the thought process was traditional sleeping hours. It gives a full 9 hours, so 10 at night till 7 in the morning is an acceptable sleeping practice for most people in the United States, the time that they bed down for the evening.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion? Councilmember?
Question along that line as well, was it considered a timeline of dusk to dawn considered as well, or dawn to dusk? Or is it simply traditional sleeping hours?
Traditional sleeping hours, Councilmember, dawn to dusk is tough, especially with daylight savings time and how different that goes with the seasons. So my recommendation was to stick with the hours, and it's a little bit easier to follow that way.
So I would move to adopt ordinance, the amended ordinance, amending LMC Section 8.10.050, enforcement of camping.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. And we just went through all of our heavy lifting for this evening, and so, city manager's report?
I'm going to put Rick Walk on the spot, give him a little time to gather himself. We received a grant from the state, and I'd like Mr. Walk to report out on that.
Yes, it'd be my pleasure. We received a grant from the Department of Commerce for doing more additional work along the housing line. So we can do a housing strategy plan, building off of the one the council just recently adopted, and the grant awards are up to $100,000. What we found out was it wasn't a competitive grant, so each jurisdiction can apply for the $100,000. And in talking with City of Tumwater and City of Olympia, we were able to pool our resources and make a coordinated grant, and actually we received $300,000 as a 3 cities to be able to do a regional housing study to address those things that are common between the various jurisdictions. As far as that grant award, we would contract with TRPC to do a lot of the baseline demographic work, develop that information that's common throughout, and then each jurisdiction can retain $50,000 to hire or do specific work within our jurisdictions that is consistent with those regional demographics. So we are in the process of developing the final interlocal agreement as well as the grant agreement with the Department of Commerce, and that'll be coming for the council here in the next month or two as we get that information together for your review and consideration. We also received a second grant award. We are due to update our shoreline master program in 2020. As part of that process, the state has authorized Department of Ecology to provide some grant assistance. We were able to receive $28,000 from Department of Ecology to update our shoreline master program. And so that is another grant that we will be working on a grant agreement with Department of Ecology, and then hire a consultant to do an audit, if you will, of our master program and suggest any changes that we should do to update it to reflect current conditions. So that will also be coming before council in the next month or two as we move forward.
Great.
Well, thank you. Before, as under my mayor's report, I guess, I just skipped over, I did mention earlier that the 3 cities are going to be meeting tomorrow. One of the agenda items I asked to be added to it was this discussion that we just had tonight, and I know that Councilmember Simmons just brought it up, is what do our ordinances when it comes to camping, how does that reflect the region? I really think we do need a regional strategy. When our ordinance is different than Olympia's, which is different than Tumwater's, and that circumstances, we may be doing the disservice, right? We may just be pushing people around. And it would really be nice if at least the 3 cities had similar ordinances. And so there was a regional approach to this issue. Instead of what we're doing in Lacey is so drastically different than Olympia, that's different than Tumwater, that just doesn't really make sense. Most of the people, even within our cities, don't always realize they're in Lacey compared to Olympia compared to Tumwater. And so I asked for that agenda item to be added to tomorrow's meeting. I will be given an update on what we passed tonight and ask that the other cities take a look at it, and hopefully we can have some consensus and a more of a regional strategy than each sort of city doing their own thing. And so that's just my 2 cents.
Okay. If I could just add on that, I'm really glad you all are having that conversation tomorrow, but at our Regional Housing Council meeting just before this, we kind of took up the issue of policy making on a regional basis to bring, like Tumwater with its rental protections, sharing with Olympia and Lacey, and our affordable housing strategy sharing. So I think you're going to see some of that, and I'd love for you to come sometime to one of our meetings so you can see that.
Great, thank you. So now we're on to boards, commissions, and committee reports. I'm up first. The Transportation Policy Board met bright and early yesterday morning at 7 a.m. And we had 3 main items on our agenda, but actually the 2 items that took up the most amount of time was Intercity Transit Strategic Plan Update. And this is something that Intercity Transit will actually be coming before this council and give us an update here at a work session very shortly, right? And so I'm not going to go too far into their update on their strategic plan, but the big question that happened that was asked, and we spent a lot of time talking about it, was what will the impact of 976 be on intercity transit? And it's about a $12 million impact next year to intercity transit. And it looks like the programs that they receive state funding for that's most in jeopardy is, of course, the dial lift program. However, the dial lift program is federally mandated. And so what they'll most likely see is, unless the state legislature acts to somehow backfill it, is that there will probably be some cutbacks on dial lift, but in order to cover those losses and keep the program going, which is federally mandated, there will most likely be some cutbacks on fixed route services as well to cover that. And so obviously that was concerning. The other thing, especially at the Transportation Policy Board level that we talk about, is that the Thurston Regional Planning Council provides rural transit services, and that is also state grant funded. And so we always think of interstate transit within Thurston County. We forget about rural transit, also that's in Thurston County, that interacts with interstate transit from Yelm and the South County, and they go down to Centralia as well. And so that is also at risk. And so they're obviously hoping the state is going to find some way to keep those programs alive. And the other,
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Rural transit is a big deal. People can ride to a place of affordability, really important.
yeah, and so it's obviously it's a
cut.
scary prospect, and we that rural transit program has been very successful, and they are on a tight budget, and they've been able to provide that service to rural Thurston County for quite a long time. So it would be really difficult if that went away. There's a lot of people coming from Yelm using that service who has jobs in Lacey. It's a huge ridership actually between Yelm and Lacey. But the going on with their strategic plan, that of course this was a lot of their strategic plan was based off of the passage of Proposition 1 in November of last year, and there was several things that they said that would happen because of that, and they're basically gave us an update where they're at. There's new coaches coming and expanded ridership or some more routes into Northeast Lacey that we will hear about when they come and talk to us.
And they
But-
don't think that will be cut because of trying to make up the
So,
gap?
well, it's a wait and see on that, on what will happen to those. Right now, they're hoping to go forward with all that. But one of the new services that came about is what they're calling the One. It's their form of bus rapid transit. So it's a route that is free to use, and it starts out in Hawks Prairie Park and Ride and goes all the way to Capitol Mall, and you can get on that with only, I think, 4 stops and do it in about 20 minutes. I know Councilmember Cox was one of the maiden voyages on that, and it looked like it's going to be pretty successful. And along those conversations, looking at their strategic plan, is this talk about going to a zero fare going forward. They're using really old technology to collect fare right now, and one of the things that they found out is that it's going to probably cost more to replace that system than it would if you just got rid of fare altogether. And so they're looking at maybe doing a pilot program on this on the zero fare. And one of the things they realized in other communities where they've gone to a zero fare is that it increases ridership between 20 and 60%. And so we're sort of waiting to see how that's going to work out, and we wish City Transit the best on all that. The next item that we spent a majority of our time on is the I-5 update. As this council knows, that we were successful last year with talking to the state legislature, and we received $550,000 really to start the process of looking at I-5. We got $500,000 from the state, and we got $50,000 from the Nisqually tribe to look at some hydrology work that they're about ready to complete. And really under this first phase, a lot of the work was done is modeling that the Thurston Regional Planning Council was able to put together that allowed the whole to look at all of Thurston County and of course, all the jurisdictions, and plus the Thurston County has a 6-year transportation improvement plan. And so what they did is they looked at if every single one of all of our jurisdictions were able to fully meet all of our transportation plan for the next 6 years, what would that do to Interstate 5? And there was a lot of really interesting information that came out of that work. And unfortunately, if you look at the modeling, I-5 is going to be a parking lot from Mounts Road all the way through the 101 interchange. And in some cases, which was really kind of unfortunate to hear, sometimes improvements within the individual jurisdictions actually makes traffic on I-5 even worse because you're making it easier to get onto I-5, which then clogs up I-5. And so some of that modeling they did was a little bit surprising. And so now it may improve traffic and flow through the county, but it could have a negative impact on actual I-5. And so it was really interesting to see that modeling in action and what each, there's different criteria they put into effect of you add this to the model, you add this to the model, and what it does to I-5. But unfortunately, there's really very few scenarios that increases the speed on I-5 to a minimum of 50 miles per hour. It just never gets there. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us to fix our problems on I-5 through Thurston County. And that took a lot of our discussion, and so we didn't actually get to our main topic that we're hoping to get to, which is the 2020 call for projects. We're going through, I've reported out in the past that we are looking at a new way to hopefully distribute federal funds. We're not going to implement a point-based system or anything like that yet, but we are going to hopefully look at a couple different criteria, making sure the projects are ready to go, that they have right-of-way completed and some other things. And so we are hoping to get to some of that discussion at this meeting, and we just weren't able to make it. So we're going to, unfortunately, it's going to push our schedule out another month. They assured us that we'll still have plenty of time to have some council transportation policy input into a new way of looking at how we distribute those federal funds and still be able to get to a call projects in time. So that is my report. Unfortunately, that's also going to make our next meeting a 2-hour-long meeting as well. So, but that's the way it goes. So that's my report. Next up is Deputy Mayor.
So the Joint Animal Services Commission, since I've reported out, met twice, both October 23rd and just this evening before council. And basically, we were going over the proposed 2020 budget. So we were looking at either trying to increase staff. We need a field service officer and at least 1 or 2 animal care technicians. And up until now, we've used reserves to help cover things because the county hasn't been brought up to the same assessment, and we're trying to correct that as well. So we had a lot of discussion, and so about whether we should have a subsidy from the reserves and add the staffing or no staffing and no use of reserves and that kind of thing. And I had to leave the meeting to make this meeting, so we were just kind of discussing what was our preference. Next meeting, we will actually make a decision about the budget based on the scenarios given to us, and hopefully I'll hear what the others said before I make a decision. So Lot Clean Water Alliance met yesterday evening, November 13th. On our work session, we had covered 4 items, and we had a brief discussion by the board of our reclaimed water agreements. The original agreement was signed quite a while ago, and things have changed. So Mayor Pete Komet asked if we could postpone making any decision about the updates until he had more time to read through them. He was pretty busy. So next meeting, we will discuss that more and then take it up with an actual board meeting. We had a presentation on the biological process improvements alternative procurement process, which is a mouthful, but it's instead of just doing a simple RFP request based totally on price, they were looking at qualifications based on criteria, and such as not just price, but experience and the team approaches, construction approaches, and other details such as safety, et cetera. And the staff gave a draft percentage of how they would weigh the RFQ interviews. For instance, 40% for price, 30% for the experience and team, 15 for the construction approaches, and 15% for other details. And after discussion, we felt that maybe they should increase price weighting by 50% and then work on the others. And so they're going to bring that back before they have their RFQ interviews. We had an update on our septic conversion incentive program. This is an incentive program that is given to homeowners to reduce connection fee costs. It's based on low income, and then others. One is 75% reduction and 50%, I believe. And Olympia wanted to do a multifamily RV park. They're low income and use the, so we break it out. We have Lacey gets a certain percentage, Olympia gets a certain percentage of the rebate, and Tumwater does. And then there's a shared pot of money. And Olympia wanted to be able to use the shared part of the money because they had 54 very low-income trailer park residents, which would apply for it. And then also Tumwater is also looking into a multifamily participants. But then our Lacey staff mentioned this converting approximately 400 units to sewer in the, the capital, I went blank, sorry about that, but the Capitol Golf Course area. And that kind of caused the staff and others to think through. And since this program was really designed for homeowners, they came back with a proposal that maybe they could set up a separate program that cities could use for major conversion, septic to sewer conversions. Similar process. Lot would match the connection fee by a certain amount, say, and I'll just throw out 50%, and then get the money back through the money when you pay your bill from in this select group, say the 400. Some of that would come back to pay off the bill, and in 5 or 6 years, that 50% rebate would be made up. So that's an option. And the board was interested, so they said to have the staff come back with a draft of the program so that we can evaluate it and make a decision. The last work session topic was about, we have a property at the Deschutes property down in the valley, and there's a transformer. The railroad left the gate open, unlocked, and in the daytime, somebody saw a truck backed up to the transformer pulling out wires, and so they were chased away, and the thing was locked. They didn't catch the thing, the people, and so everything, and then it was relocked. But unfortunately, they came back that night and cut the locks and stripped all the wires anyway. Luckily, yeah, that's sad, but luckily there wasn't any, which is a big deal, the transformer fluid, that nothing spilled. And if you remember, the Deschutes has had a spill from the brewery causing problems, and so that's pretty significant. We don't want that to happen again. So we've arranged to have the transformer totally removed in the next week to not be liable for the spill, for any spill. So our business meeting, we had a presentation by our environmental project manager on the reclaimed water infiltration study updates. And so we're on task 3, which is risk assessment. The other one was water quality characterization, and task 2 was treatment effectiveness evaluation. So when you look at risk, what's going to be a risk is based on human health, which is exposure and toxicity, and they use a 20-pound infant as the exposure impacts to a 20-pound infant. And then ecological exposure and toxicity is looks at birds and fish. So, I have to admit, this was extremely interesting to me, but I'm not going to go into detail here, just for your.
Thank you.
Yeah, I knew you would appreciate that. So, and then we had presentations on the Finance and Environmental Planning and Communications Department, their performance measures.
Nice lady.
I could have listened to
She's
this
making
all
me look
night.
good for last week.
At least I didn't cut you off like a cop council.
Yeah, right.
I have to thank you again for that, Mr. Mayor.
So I'm now on to the Olympic Region Clean Air Agency, which met in the morning yesterday. And I always bring this up. After a hearing, we always annually pass the annual Rule 1.11 reference date change. EPA changes their date, and we have to make sure that we're compliant with that. And so we have to go through a rule change to do that. So we passed that after a hearing. And then we approved updates to a personnel chapter of the Policies and Procedures Manual. There were just some minor changes, but there were some compliance issues that had to agree with state policy. And then one of the biggest discussions that occurred was we get a complaints report, and it's smoke and odor and those kinds of things. And there were 3 investigations centered around the homeless encampment on Pattison and Martin Way. And so much so that, because during cold weather, camps burn a number of items to keep warm, and some of which are quite toxic. And this caused significant odors that the staff at the IT headquarters, some of the time, they had to go home one day. It was so bad. And unfortunately, this is private property, so unless the landowner requests the removal or that we get permission from the landowner to do something, cities such as Olympia or whatever can't do anything. And one landowner can't be contacted, and the other one is sort of trying to work with authorities for the violation. So, but landowners can be fined for smoke and odor problems. And that's what ORCA will do, is give a fine to the landowner if they don't clear it up. Olympia is making sure they have burners, those little stand burners that are not dangerous and stuff, so during cold weather. And let me see. And they also are putting up waste receptacles because there's an issue of groundwater contamination in that area. So air quality for the month of October had 29 good days and 2 days of moderate days, based on the average of 2.5 microns of particulate matter, and this is fairly normal for October. And then the ozone season is over, but staff is going to keep monitoring ozone at Mountain View School. And just to put things in perspective, October had one peak day of 35 parts per billion, but the maximum is 70 parts per billion, so it was significantly below concern. And then the last item, there was a significant number of outdoor burning permits requested for October, and this was because of the new online portal for this purpose, and which is working well. And that's my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Cox.
Righty. Regional Housing Council met earlier tonight, and we worked on the very basics for an interlocal agreement among the cities of Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater, and Thurston County. We're working to define the council's scope of work and identity, our purpose, funding sources, and commitments. This is going to be a long conversation that will include the possible merger of the Housing Council with the Health and Human Services Council. The membership is almost duplicated among those two groups, and we're trying to figure out whether one organization could handle all that work. So, but it's going to be good, and we're going to have a half-day session next month to continue this conversation. At our October meeting, the council agreed to put on pause the idea of developing a stabilization site for homeless individuals at the Carpenter and Martin Way property because the costs for preparing the site alone were exorbitant. I mean, 1.5 to about 1.8 million. It has to do with a lot of grading and Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, that sort of thing. However, on the better news front, tonight the city manager and I presented the kind of rough outline of an opportunity to work with the Community Action Council to develop housing for low-income families on property the CAC owns. And so there was general agreement around the table that this is an idea worth pursuing. So because it is in our jurisdiction, we're going to just start investigating the site itself and whether this makes sense and bring something back to the council soon. So we'll keep you updated on that, but that just happened yesterday. So, and on to the Health and Human Services Council. We met on November 4th, and much of that meeting was devoted to a briefing on what's called the pipeline for housing projects to receive funding from local, state, and federal sources. The pipeline is essentially an agreement among the social service agencies that take part in the Thurston Thrives Housing Action Team to kind of line up for projects so that they're not all competing for the same dollars every year. There's general agreement. And a project has to be shovel-ready. Sometimes if a project that's slated to be the next one up isn't quite ready, they'll let the project behind it jump over it, and then the next one comes along. So it's actually a pretty smart way of doing things. We also considered funding priorities for local dollars, and decisions on those funding things will be made in the spring. So we'll keep you informed on that. With intercity transit, this is a note from that just happened yesterday, but authority members authorized the general manager to join a lawsuit that was filed in King County Superior Court contesting I-976, and it is seeking an injunction to halt it until the courts can sort out all the implications of that. And part of the heart of the lawsuit is that the same thing that got the license tab's original thing that Iman did, tossed out years ago, was that it had too many topics for a single initiative. And this one also did that. So there's that, but there's also other implications for the lawsuit as well. So
AWC is also signing on to that.
AWC, yeah, that's the Association of Washington Cities, and yeah, we're amongst a bunch of organizations that are part of it. And we have one Lacey resident who is, we've seen at our council meetings from time to time, who is just an individual who is part of the lawsuit, who is someone who uses a wheelchair and whose ability to commute to Seattle for a job would be significantly impacted by that. At our November 6th meeting, we dealt with some fairly weighty items of special interest to Lacey, were presentations on the new routes into Northeast Lacey scheduled to begin in March. Staff planners are still working on the finer points of how to navigate those routes, But essentially, it will run up all the way to Jubilee at 41st. It will also transverse Britton Parkway and then Willamette. So, and we're still working with the employers out there to make sure we get bus coverage in that area, but it's finally coming. We get service in Northeast Lacey. There are going to be 3 community outreach meetings to introduce the route changes to Northeast Lacey residents. They'll be coming up in the next few weeks. I think 2 of them are going to be held at the Community Action Council headquarters, and I think 1 will be here at City Hall. And those dates will be posted on Intercity Transit's website for that. The mayor already mentioned the inauguration of the new express route called The One, running between the Lacey Park and Ride and Capitol Mall. This route is using only the brand-new buses, which do not have fare boxes, and is a fare-free project, so that's kind of fun. On the 20th, we're going to have public hearings and key votes on the Transit Authority's proposal to implement a system-wide zero-fare pilot project. You heard a little bit about the explanation why, so I don't want to take up everybody's time with that. We'll also hold a public hearing on the proposed 2020 budget and the 2020 through 2025 strategic plan on the 20th. And then Thurston Regional Planning Council met on November 1st and outlined the agency's 2020 draft work program. We talked about some of the new work program items around housing and emergency services planning. The work program will be on council's agenda for adoption in December. We also took a look at the regional transportation plan list that the mayor referenced. There's like 71 projects on that list. We had a briefing on the draft 2045 small area employment forecasts. And we also had a kind of interesting presentation from Gil Cerise from the Puget Sound Regional Planning Council on the 2019 Puget Sound passenger-only ferry study. And it's going to be providing analysis to support current and future Puget Sound passenger ferry-only routes and identify capacity needs and possible terminal locations. So our TRPC staff will be involved in that study, and they'll keep us informed. And my last thing is not a report, it's just a notice that Thurston Thrives will be meeting on the 18th. That's my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Greenstein.
All right. So Emergency Medical Services met on the 16th of October. Just a couple of things to report on that. They conducted successful active shooter drills with multiple jurisdictions, both police and fire. And the comprehensive plan that you've heard me talk about over the last several months, almost a year now actually, is finalized and will be presented to the EMS Council at their next meeting, which is actually next week. So I'll have more to report on that after that presentation next week. TCOM 911 met on November 6th. This week actually, the RFQ for a project manager for the new radio system will go out. That is the new money that was approved by the voters for 911 radio system. So a project manager is the first step in that. Hire the project manager to oversee the whole process from beginning to end. Also, an RFQ went out last week for the new phone system, which is just due for an upgrade, and that should be coming shortly. TCOM will be coming to all of its member organizations, including Lacey, and City Manager and I discussed this at length the other day, but they need to make some changes to the intergovernmental agreement in order to go out for the bonding that'll be paid for with the new tax revenue. But in order to do that, they need to make some changes to the IGA to allow them to go out for bonding on their own rather than coming through member organizations. You may recall that last time they needed significant money, Lacey actually borrowed the money on their behalf. They've paid back all of those loans. This change will make it so they can actually go out for the bonds on their own. And that is my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Hearn.
So TCAT, Thurston County Coalition Against Trafficking, met tonight, actually, in council chambers before the meeting. And the organization is actually run quite elegantly. If I haven't mentioned it before, which I believe I have, the two main functions that TCAT works towards each year are first, in January, the community conversation, which is a very well attended for the last 4 or 5 years, open conversation with a theme about the issue of and the reality of human trafficking. When it started out, it was mostly awareness, gasps, and almost disbelief that human trafficking was an issue. Now we're to the point where we're engaging and enabling folks to make a difference. That event this year is going to be at the Lacey Community Center at 6 o'clock on January 30th, which is a Thursday. And then we will also be prepared to promote the Race Against Trafficking, the 5K race, which has traditionally been held on Israel Road in Tumwater, emanating from Mountain View Church. And that's the major fundraiser for the organization. And some of the the trainers at the TCAT meeting tonight reported that just last week they completed training for 138 students in the Tumwater School District. TCAT uses their own curriculum, which, as many things, they believe it is much more custom and appropriate and effective than an off-the-shelf national curriculum, perhaps. And the favor they have in the schools is that they use the money raised from the 5K race to go into the school district and say, hey, we got this. We'll cover all the costs. We're just looking for some access to present to the students. And invariably the school districts say, absolutely. And so that's been very effective. And good to hear that 138 students in Tumwater have been trained. And TCAT's mission is actually prevention. There are other very good organizations that are around that deal with victims of trafficking and their healing and reintroduction back into society after getting out of that and rescue. TCAT's mission is prevention, so we don't always see the work that we do, but that we feel an impact of prevention we feel is very, very important. My next report is regarding the lodging tax awards. Unfortunately, this report wasn't available for the budget meeting, and the mayor asked about it, and appreciate the thoughts about it. I'd like to take some time and just list the participants that the TCAT recommends to the council as part of this budget, but I'll also go through some of the numbers, but not too many. In summary, though, the TCAT is a full board.
LTAC.
Excuse me, thank you. LTAC, the Lodging Tax Authority for the City of Lacey. The LTAC is a full board that's comprised of myself, a council member, a community citizen, and this year we've had 2 representatives from local hotels, which is really important because this tax goes through them. It's part of their business in collecting that and then paying that to the city. We'll go by the numbers first. This year, the lodging tax recommends to the council to fund all the requests in full for a total of $596,250. In order to achieve that, the LTAC will have to pull $89,250 out of reserves. That leaves in reserves for LTAC $260,225 that are not spoken for, but there are total reserves remaining of $993,892. But the majority of those are spoken for things like maintenance for the parks and things like that, that also, are spoken for reserves. So they're not really available reserves. Just like the city of Lacey, the LTAC fund is in good shape. And we were able to fund every request this year, though we deliberated, this year do we have 4 or so or more meetings this year? So very deliberate, very complete, and we had a little bit of housekeeping to do at the end, but these are the proud recipients of LTAC funding this year, and you'll be familiar with many of them, but we also have some new ones. This year, America's Classic Jazz Festival. They're back. Brats, Brews, and Bands.
Gateway Road.
Love it. Capitol Lake Fair. Now, the committee discussed this is at Lacey LTAC, but we recognize that Capitol Lake Fair does and has historically for a long time sponsored Lake Fair scholarship princesses in Lacey schools. Cultural celebration. Experience Olympia. Experience Olympia Sports Commission. Glow in the Dark Fun Run. Got Game, Get Game Basketball Tournament. July 3rd Fireworks Spectacular. Lacey and Tune Series. Lacey Museum Operations. Lacey Spring Fun Fair. Olympic Air Show. Polyfest, which is a new one, a cultural festival. RAC Marketing and Promotion. STEM Fair. Former Mayor Graham Sackerson is definitely part of that. A South Sound Barbecue Festival. Visitor Service and Community Profile. Washington Center for the Performing Arts. Washington State Senior Games. That's my report.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Stebbin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 things to report on. I'll make it brief. First is the Solid Waste Advisory Committee met last Wednesday. On the big thing on the docket was to final approval of our solid waste management plan, but we delayed that mostly due to a letter received by Department of Ecology, where they had a few concerns. Mainly, they wanted to have a preliminary review, but the concerns, a couple of them were not adequately addressing future solid waste costs and revenues, outdated and inaccurate UTC cost assessment data, and lastly was significantly reducing Ecology's chance of disapproving the plan and giving a better understanding to residents and ratepayers the system's impact on them. So it's all addresses, all these concerns. Fellow committee members also shared a lot of these concerns. So like I said, they're delaying it and we're going to review it further. And there's some legislation that passed also that the plan needs to address as well. So that's SWAC. And then the chamber met last Wednesday, St. Martin's, and our esteemed city manager and chief of police were on the docket. I'm not sure if it's still called the State of the City Address, but it'd probably be easier if you gave a little debriefing of what the info you gave to the membership.
I may need the assistance of the chief since it was a dual presentation. Actually, it was a request or discussion with the chamber just about the state of our public safety. That's obviously very important. It speaks to our livability as a community. It's also another opportunity for the chief to be in front of our chamber members. And so we did a November presentation in terms of what our crime rate was, which is actually very favorable when you look at other communities. And we also touched on quality of life issues as it relates to homelessness and make sure that they knew what was going on in terms of that conversation.
It was well received, and I know it had a different feel than the regular state of the city address that you give to the chamber.
The chief stole the show.
Yeah,
He's a lot better looking than I am.
but it's our best attended forum every year when chief of police and the city manager come. Everybody enjoys it immensely. And then the third thing is the River Ridge High School volleyball girls team made state for the first time in 14 years, and a couple reasons. That I wanted to address that is because our Kelsey Williams, who works for the city, coaches that team, and my daughter, who's a sophomore, is on that team, and she lettered as a sophomore. I thought it was pretty good, but the fact that these programs are making it to this level is, I think a great testament of not only the coaching but our youth working hard, and that. Like I said, it's just great. I wanted everybody to know that we're sending them off tomorrow morning at 7:30 out in front of the high school. And like I said, it hasn't happened in 14 years. And so everybody, all the youth out there is working hard, trying to, make goals and that seem pretty lofty at times. Keep working hard. It pays off. And, I can't wait to go to Ellensburg and see how well they do against the really, really good competition. So that is my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Zeman.
Thank you. So Economic Development Council met on October 23rd, and I'll start with some new business. The Women's Center for Business has served 581 clients, 23 startups, and 8 capital infusions. That is fantastic. The Scale Up program is continuing forward with a new program starting in 2020 with 12 businesses currently enrolled. This is thanks to a lot of the jurisdictions, but especially Lacey, who gives out scholarships to businesses within Lacey. It is a fantastic asset to the community. Wisdom and Chocolate season is starting up again in 2020. That happens at St. Martin's University. Another fantastic opportunity for the community to come together and learn things that are not typically, that type of information is not typically accessible, as well as learning from experts in their fields and really interesting topics of conversation. The Business and Innovation Resource Conference is coming up. It's on on the 15th, so that's tomorrow. It starts at 8:30 a.m. and goes till 12. Now, it is a free opportunity. However, they are requesting a $10 donation to attend. You can find access to registration on Facebook or through thurstonedc.com. Another wonderful opportunity for the people in Lacey. So the point of that conference is to tap resources to accelerate your business. The Inspire Women Conference is happening on May 8th, 2020, and pleased to announce that EDC is partnering with Junior League to put that conference on. Always a great opportunity. The Makerspace, which we are also proud of, continues to obtain new tools and expand their programming for availability for community use. And just to kind of roll things back a little bit into October, I would like to extend congratulations to Mayor Carr, council, and the community for a very successful festival called Bucoda in Bucoda. And they were recently named Washington State's Halloween capital. So that's very exciting for not only them, but for us as a region, because anytime we draw more tourists into our region, it is a good thing for all of us. I do hope that next year Lacey makes top 3 in the casket race. I was a little disappointed in that. moving forward. Oh, and the EDC was very instrumental in that process. Another really great thing that's happened recently, we made some bylaw changes to allow for greater representation on the board. And specifically this go around, it was for South County representation. The Confederate Tribes of Chehalis Reservation have reinvested into the Thurston County EDC. I want to recognize the importance of representation of our sovereign nations in the region to participate in the board of the EDC, as they are significant drivers of our regional economic development. And that is my report.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, you have a quick
Just a
announcement?
quick announcement. We do not have a quorum for next Thursday, so we will be canceling the regular city council meeting next Thursday.
Oh, really?
Deputy Mayor?
So I would like to just do a very brief thing that I went on a tour with PSE, Kelsey Holtz, to look at our wind farm that we bought into, and they're in the process of putting up 38 towers. This is unlike the normal kinds of wind towers where they're kind of in rows. These are up and down very steep hills and gullies and stuff up on the Skookumchuck area, but they haven't got the blades up yet, and but it was pretty impressive. And she's going to come. I didn't ask. Scott suggested that maybe we should have her come and talk to us at a work session about what is happening and stuff. The interesting thing, though, is they're putting up a computer system on their blades so that large raptors, when they come through, the blades will detect that and either stop or rotate, and it learns from patterns so that they won't be impacted. Now, it won't do the small little birds or bats, but it will do the others. So that's pretty impressive. They've changed in 20 or 30 years since they've been available. So anyway, I'm sure you'll be fascinated by it.
Well, thank you for that.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, it wouldn't be fair for me to plug my daughter without plugging yours, because I know.
That's all right.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd like to share that with the.
So this will be coming before the council again because the Northwest Christian cross-country team again won state, and so I know we recognized them last year. My daughter ran at state, and she was the fastest freshman in the state in her division, so I was very proud of that. But I look forward to having Northwest Christian here again so we can recognize the boys for taking state. The girls came in, I think, in 5th place or something like that in state. But my daughter lettered her freshman year, and she was recognized as one of the top performers in the league too. So I'm very proud of her. So that is the end of our meeting. As it's been pointed out, we're not going to have a meeting next week, and then there's Thanksgiving after that. So we won't be meeting again until December. But until then, happy Thanksgiving, everyone out there, and you keep it classy, Lacey, and I'll call this meeting adjourned.